The organ's sorrowful notes filled the chapel. Guests in black bowed their heads. My son weeping beside the casket. Dad was the most wonderful man. We'll miss him forever. Tears flowed, tissues trembled, but rage burned inside me. When I was sick, no one called, no one came. Yet here they sat acting like grieving saints before an empty coffin. My grip tightened on my cane. The box was hollow, I was still alive, and today I would walk in and shatter their cruel lie. What would you do if a father suddenly walked into his own funeral? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the rest of the story. The Harris house had always been more than just wood and stone. To Mr. Harris, it was a promise one built with his late wife, Anna, brick by brick, memory by memory. To his son Daniel and daughter-in-law Clara, however, it was something else entirely, wealth waiting to be claimed. At 70 years old, Mr. Harris carried the solitude of a widower with quiet dignity. Each morning, he swept the yard, watered the lemon tree his wife had planted decades ago, and sat by the window with a cup of tea cooling in his hands. His silver hair caught the light of dawn. His frame was slightly bent but steady, and to the neighbors he was simply the old man who loved his house too much to ever leave it. Yet within the walls, tension grew thicker every day. Daniel's demands became bolder. Clara's tone sharper, though still wrapped in courtesy. She would pour her father-in-law tea and say in a voice sweetened with false concern, "You've worked hard enough, Father. Why not let Daniel handle the house now? It will save us all so much trouble later." Mr. Harris never raised his voice, but his refusal was always firm. "This house is not just property. It is your mother's memory. As long as I breathe, I will not let it be reduced to a transaction." The refusals hardened Daniel's impatience. Clara's whispers in the quiet corners of the house grew sharper, pressing into Daniel's thoughts. If he never signs, we will never have the house. What if he changes his will? What if he gives it away? We can't wait forever. Mr. Harris could see it in their eyes. They no longer saw him as a father to honor, but as an obstacle to outlast. He feared that if he stayed, pressure would grow unbearable, perhaps even dangerous. One morning before dawn, he packed a small bag, slipped his black notebook and Anna's photograph inside, and walked out of the house with his cane. A neighbor noticed him that morning. "I saw him," the man later told others. "He was carrying a bag, walking down the road like he was leaving for a journey. I thought he was visiting someone, but he never came back." As days turned into weeks, the story spread. The old man had vanished. Some said he collapsed on the road somewhere. Others whispered he might have drowned or been robbed. But the truth was simple: no one had seen him again. And in the absence of evidence, rumor became certainty. After months of silence, people nodded gravely and said what they all feared to believe: Mr. Harris must be dead. Daniel seized the moment. "If he's gone," he muttered late one night, pacing the living room, "then what do we do now? Without proof, without a certificate, the lawyer won't transfer anything. The house just stays in limbo." Clara's eyes glimmered with calculation. "Then we give them proof," she said. When Daniel frowned in confusion, she leaned closer. "We don't need a body. People already believe he's gone. The neighbors saw him leave and never return. They've been saying it for months. All we need is to make it official, host a funeral. Once the community accepts it, the lawyer will have no choice, and we will look like dutiful children. No one will question us." Daniel hesitated, but greed pressed harder than doubt. He nodded slowly. "Fine, we'll do it." The house transformed overnight. White cloth draped the walls. A polished coffin sealed shut was set in the center of the living room. On the altar, a large framed photograph of Mr. Harris sat surrounded by wreaths of lilies. The air grew heavy with incense smoke. Clara orchestrated every detail, even hiring mourners whose wails filled the house with a grief so loud it almost drowned out its hollowness. Daniel rehearsed his lines in the mirror. "My father was a private man. He loved this home, this family. We will honor his memory," over and over until he could speak it without faltering. On the day of the funeral, neighbors gathered, shaking their heads with practiced sorrow. "I remember the morning he left," one said. "Bag in hand, never came back. Poor old man." Another added, "At least his children are giving him a proper farewell." No one dared ask why the coffin was sealed. Clara explained with trembling voice, "Father's condition was not suitable to show. Please let us preserve his dignity." The explanation silenced doubt. Who would insist on seeing the face of the dead? But not everyone believed. Lily, Daniel's 12-year-old daughter, stood apart from the crowd. She stared at the coffin with eyes too sharp for her age. "Why is it closed?" she whispered to her cousin. "Why didn't anyone see him?" "Grandpa always said goodbyes should be honest." Her cousin looked away. "Don't say that. It's disrespectful." But Lily's young heart clung to a stubborn truth: something wasn't right. When the lawyer arrived, the air grew tighter. Mendez stepped into the room with a leather folder under his arm. Daniel rushed to greet him, his face arranged into grief. "Thank you for coming. My father valued your counsel. We thought it best if you could read his will so everyone knows we are handling things properly." Mendez scanned the room with sharp eyes lingering on the coffin, then on Lily's troubled face, before nodding slowly. As incense thickened and mourners wailed, Daniel clasped his hands, repeating his lines with trembling conviction. Clara hovered beside him, whispering directions when his mask threatened to slip. The coffin loomed silently, its emptiness concealed beneath layers of ritual. Lily's fists clenched at her sides, her young voice almost breaking through the smoke. "Grandpa isn't gone," she whispered fiercely. "I know it." And as Mendez opened his folder to begin reading the old will aloud, the fragile balance between lie and truth quivered, waiting for the moment it would shatter. Before the incense smoke, before the whispers of neighbors who swore they saw him vanish, before the coffin was sealed with nothing inside, there was a life that had been lived with quiet devotion. The Harris house did not rise from wealth but from sweat and blisters. Mr. Harris and Anna, his wife, had built it when their hands were still young and strong, carrying bricks together, mixing mortar in the sun, and learning to forgive each other's mistakes with laughter. When the last wall was raised and the roof beams settled into place, Anna had teased him. "Now we must argue often, so the house learns to forgive us too." For decades they filled that house with quarrels and reconciliations, meals and lullabies, silence and song. Daniel had been their only child, born into the echo of hammering nails and the scent of wet cement. As a boy, he ran through the yard, chasing the dog, climbed the lemon tree that stubbornly bore fruit even in lean years, and slammed doors like punctuation whenever anger overtook him. Mr. Harris used to shake his head with a smile and say, "One day you'll stop slamming doors, son. You'll learn the weight of hinges." The house witnessed everything: Daniel's first fever, his first victory in school, his first clumsy lie about homework. It also held Anna's laughter, which always filled the kitchen when she baked bread, and her voice when she sang softly at night to calm their boys' restless dreams. But years are merciless. The house also witnessed Anna's illness, her slow fading, the quiet battles against medical bills that ate into savings. Mr. Harris worked overtime shifts, skipped meals, counted bills under dim light. Anna, even in pain, made him promise one thing: keep the house. "Even if I'm not here to wash its windows, don't let it go. It's not just shelter, it's us." He promised not with dramatic words, but with the plain seriousness that makes a vow unbreakable. He had not promised the house to a bank or a document. He had promised it to a woman who learned the weight of beams with him, who kept a ledger of meals and mercies in her head. On winter nights when the kettle sang and the lemon tree sulked in the cold, Anna would count the months until blossom and say, "We are not rich, but we are housed by our work." After she was gone, he began talking to the rooms as if they were stubborn sons. "Don't warp, don't leak. Don't forget the hands that made you." He sanded the stair rail once a year, changed the window latches before they failed, and polished the brass numbers on the door on the first day of spring. These were not chores, they were a ritual of belonging. When Daniel later called the place an asset, Mr. Harris heard a mispronunciation of a sacred word. She died one winter morning with sunlight spilling pale through the curtains. He held her hand until it cooled, whispered her name until his throat was raw. And when silence finally won, the house seemed to inhale her absence and never exhale it. Daniel, still young, then cried into his father's chest. Mr. Harris buried his wife beneath the lemon tree, placing a small stone carved with her initials. And from then on, every time he watered the tree, he whispered to her, as though she still leaned in the kitchen doorway. Life became smaller, lonelier. Mr. Harris carried his grief into ritual: the morning sweep of the porch, the evening tea, the steady hand on the radio dial, when the news became too heavy. Daniel grew restless. He studied, worked, dreamed of more. He spoke of ventures and opportunities of money that could multiply if only one was bold enough. Mr. Harris listened, sometimes admiring his son's ambition, sometimes fearing it. Ambition, he knew, could become hunger, and hunger could swallow memory whole. When Daniel brought Clara home, Mr. Harris greeted her with polite warmth. She was sharp, well-spoken, her smile precise. She sat at his kitchen table, as if already measuring it against what could be improved. We'll have a simple wedding, she said, resting her hand on Daniel's. We don't need anything fancy. But her eyes lingered on the house in a way that unsettled him. To give his son a start, Mr. Harris sold a narrow strip of land behind the house, the piece where Anna's lemon tree cast its afternoon shadow. He told her photograph later. It's just a little. They need a head start. But something in his chest felt hollow. Daniel's relief sounded less like gratitude and more like expectation. Clara's thank you was polite, efficient, and already calculating how to stretch the remainder into savings. Then came the papers. Daniel laid them on the table, smiling too wide. It's just a transfer, Dad. For taxes. It doesn't change anything, you'll still live here. It just makes things simpler. Mr. Harris read carefully, his eyes narrowing. It says ownership changes immediately. Daniel waved a hand. That's just legal wording. Don't worry about it. Clara chimed in, her tone smooth. It's what families do, Dad. Protect the future. But Mr. Harris heard the clink of chains in that word future. He put the pen down. Your mother asked me to keep the house. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom didn't mean forever. She meant in the family. And I am family. Clara sipped her tea, smiling faintly, saying nothing. The requests returned in different disguises. Tax efficiency, medical proxy, estate planning. Always papers, always signatures. Always pressure dressed as practicality. Mr. Harris grew weary. He began writing in his black notebook, recording every attempt, every whisper. On the first page, underlined twice, he wrote, "Keep the house." Yet not all was dark. The day Lily was born, joy filled the house again. Mr. Harris cradled his granddaughter with reverence, whispering to her that the lemon tree was magic and would always protect her. For a while he let himself believe in redemption. He walked the halls at night so Daniel and Clara could rest. He built Lily a crib and told her bedtime stories about her grandmother Anna. Her laughter echoing in the house reminded him of Anna's voice, and it healed him in ways nothing else could. But as Lily grew, Clara's ambitions sharpened. She talked of tuition investments, refinancing. Her eyes often strayed to the walls, the windows, the roof, as though the house itself was an untapped bank. Daniel followed her lead, torn between love for his father and the lure of security promised by his wife. Mr. Harris, patient but unyielding, refused each new scheme. This house will not be sold, mortgaged, or handed over. It will stay as it is until the day I truly leave it. Then came the moment that broke what patience remained. One afternoon, returning quietly, Mr. Harris overheard Daniel's voice in the living room, low and urgent. If he doesn't sign, we're stuck. I can't invest. I can't move forward. He'll live forever on tea and stubbornness. We need to resolve this. Clara's reply was colder. People die without bodies all the time. It's the story that matters. If we host a proper funeral, who will question it, especially after he's been gone so long? The words froze him where he stood. He, alive and listening, heard the plan to bury him in spirit. He wanted to storm and shout, accuse, demand loyalty. But something held him back. Perhaps it was sorrow deeper than anger. Perhaps it was the desire to see how far they would go. Perhaps it was the need to let truth expose itself without his prompting. That night he packed his bag, 3 shirts, a sweater, his notebook, and Anna's small framed photograph. He patted the lemon tree leaves like a farewell to a friend and walked into the night. To the neighbors, he was simply an old man going on a journey. To his son and daughter-in-law, his absence became opportunity. And so the story grew. The old man left with a bag one morning and never came back. Weeks passed, then months. People whispered, then concluded. He must be dead. Daniel and Clara let the rumors do their work, and when enough time had passed, they prepared their theater of grief. The living room was thick with smoke lilies and whispered prayers. A coffin lay in the center, sealed tight, polished, until it reflected the trembling faces around it. A large photograph of Mr. Harris stared back at them from the altar, the black ribbon framing his stern but familiar face. The neighbors nodded knowingly. I saw him, one muttered, walking away with a bag. Never came back. Poor old man. Another sighed. Months gone without a word. It was bound to happen. Their words repeated enough had become truth. Daniel moved among the mourners, his voice low, rehearsed. My father was a private man, he said again and again, bowing deeply. He loved this home, this family. We will do everything to honor his memory. His hands shook as he spoke, but no one questioned trembling in a grieving son. Clara hovered nearby, orchestrating each gesture, each tear reminding him when to lower his eyes, when to let his voice break. Her whispers were sharp stage directions disguised as compassion. "Cry harder when the lawyer arrives," she hissed. "Bow when you greet him. Remember, today is about convincing, not mourning." But not every eye was fooled. Lily stood at the back, her small hands clutching her dress. At 12 years old, she had loved her grandfather more than anyone in that room. She stared at the coffin, her young voice trembling. "Why is it closed? Why can't we see him?" she asked her cousin. "Grandpa always said goodbyes should be honest." The cousin shifted, muttering, "Don't say that. It's disrespectful." But Lily's suspicion refused to fade. The whispers started at the bakery line and traveled faster than the morning bus. One neighbor swore he'd seen the old man at dawn with a canvas bag and a coat he only wore for long trips. Another added that the mail piled for weeks, then months, until even the postman stopped knocking. Soon the story had edges: a tired man walking east, a summer heat that punished the fragile roadside no one watched. People repeated it not because they were cruel, but because it made sense of the ache. By the time the lilies arrived and the white cloths were pinned, the rumor had stiffened into certainty. "He loved this house," a woman murmured, touching the frame of Mr. Harris's photograph. "But bodies leave even the places they love." Clara accepted condolences with a practiced tremble in her voice. Daniel stood beside the sealed coffin and tried to look like a son who had learned grief's grammar overnight. And when someone asked gently whether there would be a viewing, Clara bowed her head and said the single sentence that shuts most doors: "Please let us preserve his dignity." When Mendez arrived, silence rippled across the room. The lawyer's steps were slow, deliberate. He carried a leather folder under his arm, his expression unreadable. Daniel rushed to greet him, clutching his hand with exaggerated grief. "Thank you for coming. My father valued you. We thought it best if you could read his will so everyone knows things are handled properly." Mendez's eyes swept over the sealed coffin, then to Lily's tense face before nodding slightly. He said nothing, but in the stillness suspicion flickered. The mourners quieted as Mendez stepped toward the altar. Daniel and Clara stood behind him, clasping their hands together, their grief practiced, their poise rehearsed. Daniel watched Mendez's thumb slide beneath the first page and felt his stomach dip as if the floor had loosened a fraction. He'd timed the speeches, memorized the pauses, even practiced the tight smile of a man holding it together. But lawyers had a way of making air feel factual. Clara's nails touched his sleeve, 2 small taps steady. The hired mourners swelled and fell like a tide on cue. A cousin coughed. Someone's bracelet chimed. Lily's stare burned at the back of his neck. He kept his eyes on the lilies, white, obedient, indifferent. All they needed was 10 more minutes, a reading, a nod, a confirmation that grief could be notarized. Then the story would hold. Then the house would tilt their way. Mendez cleared his throat. Daniel lowered his head to catch the pity of the room, and in that lowered posture felt the sharpest thing of all. Not sorrow, but fear that the door might open. Mendez opened his folder. The papers rustled like dry leaves in the heavy air. "This is the last will of Mr. Harris," he began, drafted before his disappearance. "I have been asked to read it today before his family and community." The room leaned in. Clara's eyes gleamed. Daniel's heart pounded. The coffin stood silent. Lily held her breath. And then the doors groaned. A gust of air swept through the smoke. All heads turned. Gasps erupted like a wave breaking. Mr. Harris stood in the doorway. His hair was wild from travel, his clothes worn, but his back straight, his eyes alive with fire. He leaned on his cane, each step echoing against the floor like a verdict. Shock spread across faces: neighbors who had repeated his death, relatives who had mourned him, and his own son who had staged his burial. "I'm not dead," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "You buried me while I was still breathing." A teacup slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. Clara's face froze. Daniel stumbled back, his lips moving but no words forming. Lily let out a sob and without hesitation broke into a run. "Grandpa!" she cried, flinging herself into his arms. He bent to embrace her, his cane shaking in his grasp, his lips pressing against her hair. "For you, child," he whispered, "I would always come back." The room rearranged itself around the living. People who had sat close to the coffin drifted toward the walls as if wood could shield them from shame. An aunt crossed herself and cried for real this time. The hired mourners quieted, their script stolen. Mendez's face, which had been politely grave, sharpened into attention. The folder in his hand no longer looked ceremonial, but evidentiary. Daniel, emptied of posture, was only a son whose story had been caught mid-sentence. Clara's mouth formed a word she didn't speak, a mistress. Harris steadied Lily with a hand that shook once, then decided not to. The room fell into chaos. Some relatives wept with relief, others recoiled in disbelief. Mendez closed his folder silently, his eyes sharp now, waiting. Mr. Harris straightened his gaze, sweeping the room. Look at this coffin. Empty. Just like the loyalty of those who placed it here. You invited the world to mourn me, but what you buried was not my body, it was your conscience. Daniel found his voice at last. Father, we thought you were gone. What else could we do? You could have hoped, Mr. Harris replied, his tone heavy with sorrow. You could have searched longer, prayed harder, trusted deeper. Instead, you chose the quicker path, lies. Clara's mask cracked, but her voice rose sharp and cold. We only did what was necessary. You clung to this house like it was a shrine while we struggled. We needed security. We needed the future. Mr. Harris turned to her, eyes burning. And so you buried me alive in spirit, called the lawyer to read a will over my empty coffin. Mendez stepped forward, his voice carrying weight. Yes, they did. They asked me here to read the will to make official what was never theirs. But it seems, Mr. Harris, you have returned with something stronger than rumor. Slowly, Mr. Harris placed his black notebook on the altar. I didn't disappear in ignorance. I left with my eyes open. In this book are not only my thoughts, but copies of the papers Daniel pushed me to sign, recordings of Clara, urging him on dates and words etched as evidence. Lies are loud, but truth keeps its receipts. Gasps rippled again. Mendez opened the notebook, scanning the entries, the photocopied documents tucked inside the transcripts of conversations. He looked up, his face stern. This is more than memory. This is evidence, and if need be, it will be used in court. Daniel paled. Court? You would drag me, your son, into court. You dragged yourself there, Mr. Harris said softly, when you buried your father alive for the sake of a house. The relatives began to murmur, some shaking their heads in disgust, others whispering prayers. Clara's defiance wavered, her face drained of color. Mr. Harris's voice rose steady and unflinching. You wanted to chisel my name into stone before I had drawn my last breath. But the dead man in this funeral is not me. It is the bond between father and son. You have choked it with lies, and now you must live with that truth. Daniel's knees buckled. He collapsed into a chair, his hands covering his face. Clara stood rigid, trembling, her pride crumbling with every second. Mr. Harris lifted his cane and tapped it against the coffin. The hollow sound rang through the room. Empty, he said again. Like your loyalty, like your honor. He turned to the mourners. You all came here believing. Ask yourselves why, because it was easier to accept a story than to seek the truth. Remember this day, for lies spread quickly, but truth always arrives, even if limping on a cane. The room was silent, except for Lily's sobs muffled against her grandfather's chest. Mendez closed the notebook firmly under his arm. The false funeral was over, shattered by the presence of the living man it pretended to bury. And in that silence, Mr. Harris spoke the words that struck deeper than any gavel. Today you have not buried me. You have buried your own conscience. And from this day forward, I will not let deceit decide the fate of this house. The coffin remained closed, empty and damning, as if holding not a body but the weight of betrayal itself. The silence after his words lingered longer than the smoke that curled from the incense sticks. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some lowering their eyes, others staring at Daniel and Clara as if seeing them clearly for the first time. Daniel sat collapsed in his chair, face hidden behind trembling hands. Clara's jaw was clenched tight, but her eyes betrayed cracks darting left and right as though searching for an escape. Mr. Harris stood steady, his cane rooted on the wooden floor, his granddaughter pressed to his side. He looked down at her small face, wet with tears, and stroked her hair gently. For a brief moment, all the noise and betrayal melted away, and he saw only Lily, the child who had believed in him, even when the world was eager to accept his death. He raised his eyes again to the room, his voice softer now, but carrying weight. Do you see, he asked, how fragile truth is? It can be buried by whispers, by ceremonies, by the eagerness of those who find convenience in believing. Truth is not loud by nature. It is patient. It waits behind doors and under dust. It lets people build altars to their convenience and does not interrupt until it must. When it arrives, it does not always roar. Sometimes it simply stands in a doorway and breathes. Mr. Harris looked at the faces that had preferred a sealed box to an unanswered question and felt an old weariness settle in his bones. You were kind, he said softly, but you were not careful. Kindness without care lets lies borrow your hands. A murmur passed through the room, the sound people make when an accusation chooses the polite grammar of a blessing. All it took was a sealed coffin and a photograph, and you were ready to mourn me. His words landed heavily not only on Daniel and Clara, but on the relatives who had come, who had nodded along, who had accepted the story without question. No one spoke. The shame in the air was thick, not only for the son and daughter-in-law, but for every person who had allowed lies to take the shape of reality. Mr. Harris's gaze settled on Daniel. His voice trembled not from rage, but from sorrow. I gave you life, son. I built this house with your mother so you would never be without shelter. I worked my hands raw so you would have a place to belong. And when I disappeared, what did you do? Did you search every road? Did you ask every neighbor? Did you pray for me to return? No, you buried me with incense and lilies so you could hold a deed in your hand. You did not mourn me, you replaced me. Daniel lifted his face red and blotched, his voice breaking. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. Desperation is not an excuse for betrayal, Harris said. I would have helped you if you had asked. I would have shared your burden if you had spoken honestly. But you chose deceit, and deceit cannot be dressed as love. He turned then to Clara, whose eyes burned with unshed tears of fury. You call it survival. You say love doesn't pay bills, that memories don't feed children. But what feeds a child? Clara, what shelters them truly? Is it walls and numbers? Or is it the knowledge that the people around them are honest, loyal, and trustworthy? You wanted to teach Lily that lies can protect her, but I will not let that lesson take root. Clara looked away, lips pressed thin, her silence louder than any denial. The mourners watched in stillness, each word striking them with the weight of their own complicity. Mr. Harris's voice deepened, carrying years of quiet endurance. You all came here thinking you were honoring me. Ask yourselves, did you honor me? Or did you honor a lie? Did you come because you loved me, or because you were told a story convenient enough to believe? A few heads bowed, some whispered apologies under their breath. Mr. Harris sighed, his hand trembling as he rested it on the coffin. His photograph stared back at him, framed in black. It was like gazing at his own ghost, a version of himself stripped of breath and voice, reduced to an image others could manipulate. This is what they wanted the world to remember of me, he said quietly. A picture, a coffin, smoke and silence. But I'm here. And the true burial today is not of me, it is of the trust between father and son. He closed his eyes briefly, letting memories wash over him. Anna's laughter in the kitchen, the sound of Daniel as a boy kicking a ball in the yard, the promise whispered over her grave to keep the house safe. When he opened his eyes again, tears glistened. It is not my death that wounds me. It is the death of the bond we once had. That bond, Daniel, you buried long before you tried to bury me. Daniel's chest heaved. His lips moved, but no words came. Clara kept her head turned, frozen in her silence. The weight of the moment pressed into every corner of the room. For a long breath, no one moved. Then Lily's small voice cut through, trembling but fierce. Grandpa, don't be sad. You came back. You're here. That's what matters. Her words pulled him back from the abyss. He bent and kissed her forehead, whispering, For you, child, I will always return. Let this be the lesson you remember. Truth can disappear, but it will always come home. Straightening again, he looked at the mourners, his voice once more steady. A house is not just bricks and mortar. It is the echo of promises, the smell of bread at dawn, the laughter of a child who believes in magic. To reduce it to property, to build a funeral upon lies, is to bury love itself. Remember this when you leave here today. Lies may feed ambition, but only truth feeds the soul. His cane struck the floor once, sharp and final, like a gavel ending a trial. The room remained hushed. Mendez tucked the notebook firmly under his arm, his silence a promise that justice had only begun. Clara's face was pale. Daniel's broken, the relatives uneasy. And Mr. Harris, though standing in the middle of a false funeral, looked more alive than ever, alive in his grief, alive in his truth, alive in the pain that had reshaped him. The reflection was not for his son alone, nor his daughter-in-law, nor the neighbors. It was for everyone, a mirror held up to show how quickly lies can be dressed as love, and how easily truth can be ignored until it stands at the door and knocks. The silence after his reflection was broken not by Daniel, not by Clara, but by the sound of papers being tapped against a folder. Mendez, calm and deliberate, stepped forward. His presence carried the weight of authority that no incense or ritual could overshadow. "Let us be clear," he said evenly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Harris is alive. As long as he lives, no will, no signature, no whispered arrangement can change the fact that this house belongs to him. The law recognizes the living, not the lies told about them." Whispers rippled across the room. Relatives nodded, some relieved, others shifting uncomfortably. Daniel's head jerked up, panic in his eyes. Clara's lips tightened into a thin line, her defiance wavering but not gone. "You can't just walk in here and undo everything." Clara snapped, her voice sharp, trembling at the edges. "We acted because he abandoned us. He disappeared for months without a word. What were we supposed to do?" People were asking questions. We gave them closure. Mr. Harris turned his gaze on her, weary but unflinching. "Closure is not a lie sealed in wood. Closure is not calling the lawyer to read a will while the man still breathes. You call it closure, but it was greed." Daniel lurched to his feet, voice cracking. "I thought you were gone. Everyone thought you were gone. And we—" His throat tightened. "We needed the house, Father. We needed it for our future." Mr. Harris's sorrow deepened, but his voice remained firm. "And so you buried me alive in spirit to claim it. You chose deceit instead of trust, and for that you will answer." He reached into his coat and drew out the black notebook worn at the edges from months of use. He placed it on the altar beside the empty coffin. "I didn't disappear blindly. I left with my eyes open. In this book are not only my words, but proof photocopies of the documents you tried to force upon me, recordings of Clara's whispers, urging you on dates and times of every attempt to take what was not yet your." Mendez slid a small recorder from the notebook sleeve and pressed play. Clara's voice filled the room, thinner than in life, but unmistakable. "People die without bodies all the time. It's the story that matters. If we host a proper funeral, who will question it?" Then Daniel's reply, tired and eager in the same breath. "If he never signs, we're stuck." Mendez stopped the tape before it could be cruel and said, "Authenticated timestamps, copied with consent." He lifted the photocopies, next forms pre-filled signature lines bright with expectation. "If this were a contract," he added quietly, "you'd call it pressure. In a family, you called it love." The difference hung in the air like a scent everyone recognized and pretended not to. Gasps echoed. Relatives leaned forward, stunned. Mendez opened the notebook, flipping through pages filled with precise notes, clipped papers, and slips of recordings transcribed in ink. His face grew more solemn with each turn. He closed it with deliberate finality. "This is more than memory. This is evidence. And if it comes to court, it will stand." Daniel staggered back as if struck. "Court? You would drag me your own son into court?" Mr. Harris leaned heavily on his cane, his voice quieter now, heavy with heartbreak. "A father does not drag his son to court, but a son who buries his father while he still breathes drags himself there." The words silenced the room. Clara's composure cracked. "You can't do this," she hissed. "If you tell the world, if this becomes public, what will they say of the Harris family? Do you want to shame your own blood?" Mendez answered before Mr. Harris could. "The shame does not come from truth. It comes from staging a funeral for a living man. The law does not cover your pride, Mrs. Harris. It covers the facts. And the facts are damning." The mourners exchanged looks, some with disgust, others with pity. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his face pale. He looked more like a cornered boy than a grown man. Mr. Harris's gaze softened for a brief second, enough to show the wound beneath his steel. "I did not want this. I wanted peace. I wanted to leave behind not just a house, but honor. But you have forced my hand." His voice hardened again. "From this day forward, the fate of this house will not be whispered in shadows or decided by lies. It will be decided openly before the law, where evidence speaks louder than deceit." Mendez gave a short nod. "Steps have already been taken. Mr. Harris has prepared a new will drafted in my office, safeguarded until its proper time. That will does not reward betrayal." The words sliced through the air. Relatives gasped, their whispers swelling. Clara's face drained of color. Daniel's eyes widened, horror dawning. "A new will," he croaked. What do you mean?" Mr. Harris looked directly at his son. "I mean that what I leave behind will not be dictated by blood alone, but by loyalty and honesty. I mean that the house you tried to seize will not be your reward. My legacy will not be stolen by deceit." Daniel's knees buckled and he collapsed back into his chair, his face pale, his breath ragged. Clara's defiance flickered out, leaving only fear. Mr. Harris lifted his cane and struck the floor, once the sound echoing like a gavel. This family gathered for a funeral. But what has died today is not me, it is the trust between father and son. And from this moment, truth will be the only heir to my name. The room fell into silence, thick and heavy, as if everyone felt the ground beneath them shift. Mendez closed the notebook and tucked it firmly under his arm. Lily clung to her grandfather's hand, her small face fierce with love. Everyone realized in that moment the old man who was supposed to be gone had returned, not just alive, but armed with truth, with evidence, with a will sharpened by betrayal. What began as a funeral had become the opening strike of a reckoning. The air in the room was thick, trembling with everything that had been revealed. The coffin sat like an exposed lie, its emptiness echoing louder than the mourners' wails. Mendez stood steady with the notebook under his arm. Lily's small hand clung to her grandfather's, her eyes wide and unblinking. Then Daniel's voice shattered the silence. He shot up from his chair, his face red, his body trembling. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice breaking. "You disappear for months, make us believe you're dead, and now you humiliate me in front of everyone. You think you're the victim here. No, you're the cause of all this." Clara tried to grab his arm, but he shook her off violently. His fury was raw, his pride bleeding. "You think you can just walk in and erase everything. You think these people will side with you after what you've done. You left us, and now you act like some saint, like you never abandoned your family." Mr. Harris leaned on his cane, his voice calm, but iron beneath the surface. "I left because you wanted my death more than my presence, and today proves it. You did not wait for me to return, you buried me while my heart still beat." Daniel's fists trembled. "If you want to fight, you'll have one. You drag me to court, fine. We'll see who they believe. You'll regret turning your back on your own blood." Clara's voice cut through, colder but trembling at the edges. "Do you hear yourself?" she snapped at Mr. Harris. "You'll ruin your family's name. The community will laugh. You'll die hated, not honored." Mendez stepped forward, his voice like steel. "The Harris name is already stained, not by this man, but by you. And the law will not bow to pride or threats. It will bow to truth." The relatives shifted, whispers running like cracks through the room. Some stared at Daniel in disbelief, others at Clara with open contempt. A few shook their heads, muttering prayers. Mr. Harris tapped his cane against the floor, once sharp and steady. The sound silenced the room. "If you want war, Daniel, then it will not be fought with whispers in kitchens or coffins filled with lies. It will be fought in the open, before the law, where your schemes will stand naked against truth. That is where I will meet you." Daniel's face twisted, his voice raw. "This isn't over," he roared. Mr. Harris turned his back to him, taking Lily's hand. At the doorway he paused, his shoulders heavy but unbowed. Without turning, he spoke so the words reached every corner of the house. "Remember this, the man you tried to bury still walks. The ones truly buried today are your honor and your conscience. The dead man in this funeral is not me, it is the bond between us." His cane struck the threshold as he stepped into the night. Mendez followed the notebook secure under his arm. The mourners parted in silence, no one daring to stop him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You tried to bury me while I still breathed," he said, the door dark behind him, the house listening. "But the only thing buried here today is your conscience. The dead man in this funeral is not me, it is the bond between us." He stepped out, and the night took him in without question. If you were Mr. Harris, would you forgive your son or let the court decide? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your voice. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us, and it helps bring more stories like this to life. Thank you for watching.